Hi, I'm Alexis Wadeland, osteopath at Blossoming Me and Healthy Learning Lounge. Welcome to the very first episode of our new series, Recovery Reframed. Over the next 4 weeks, I'd like to gently challenge some of the most common assumptions that I hear in clinic almost every day. Not because they're completely wrong, but because sometimes the way we think about our bodies can quietly, behind the scenes, slow our recovery. My hope is that by the end of this series, you'll have a little more confidence in your body, a little less fear, and perhaps start looking at your health through a slightly different lens. So let's start with one of the biggest assumptions I hear almost every day. Can I ask you a question? Has anybody ever told you your pelvis is out, one leg is shorter, your spine is out of alignment, your posture is terrible? Or maybe you're looking at yourself in the mirror and thought, no wonder my back hurts, look how crooked I am. If this sounds familiar, you're certainly not alone. In fact, it's one of the first conversations I often have with people when they first come into the clinic. I remember one lovely lady who came to see me not too long ago. Before she even sat down, she smiled and said, "I think my pelvis is out again." So I asked her, "What makes you think that?" She said, "Well, my back's sore again. One hip feels higher than the other. My jeans don't seem to be sitting straight anymore." I just feel a little bit twisted. As she was talking, I realized I'd probably had that same conversation hundreds of times over the years. Sometimes it's the pelvis, sometimes it's about the neck, sometimes it's about the shoulders. Sometimes people tell me that their ribs have gone out, or that one leg is shorter, or that they know they have terrible posture, and that's probably why they're in pain. And do you know what? I completely understand why people think that, because when we're looking structurally, that's actually the case. Many of us have grown up hearing messages like sit up straight, shoulders back, make sure you don't slouch. You're standing crooked, straighten up. We see pictures of perfect posture. We've been shown ideal spinal curves. We've been told our hips should be level, our shoulders should be level, our body should be symmetrical. So if something hurts, or if we notice one shoulder is sitting a little higher, or we catch ourselves slouching, it's perfectly understandable that we think, maybe my body's out of alignment. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something really clear. Your posture matters, and you might be out of perfect alignment. The way your body moves matters. The way different parts of our body work together really matters. And yes, changes in posture, movement, patterns, and the way we load our bodies can absolutely contribute to pain. So today isn't about pretending that posture doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. I'd simply like to ask a different question. Is posture the whole story? Or could there be a much bigger picture that helps explain why our body is feeling the way it is feeling? Because in my experience, when we only focus on trying to straighten the body, we can sometimes miss what the body is actually trying to tell us. One of the reasons that I love being an osteopath is that I get to watch how beautifully adaptable the human body really is. Every single day, I see bodies finding ways to cope, finding ways to protect, finding ways to keep people moving despite old injuries, busy lives, emotional stress, pregnancy, desk jobs, growing children, sports injuries, surgeries, and everything else that life can throw at us. Our bodies are constantly adapting, and that's something that I think we often underestimate. Think about what happens when you walk. Your pelvis has to rotate, and your rib cage has to rotate in the opposite way. Your spine has to twist, rotate, side bend. Your hips, one hip accepts your body's weight while the other one swings through, and your arms naturally move in the opposite direction to that. Your feet are constantly adjusting to the ground beneath you. Now, trying to keep your body in one perfect aligned position whilst walking. You'd look a bit like a robot, wouldn't you? It would feel awkward, and it certainly wouldn't be efficient. Movement isn't the opposite of good posture. Movement is part of good function. That's why I'd like to offer you a different way of thinking. Not better, not worse, just different. Because I think this one idea has the potential to completely change your way of seeing your body. The body isn't trying to be perfectly aligned, it's trying to be adaptable and functional. Take a moment to really think about that, because I believe it changes almost everything that follows. So let's come back to the lady who thought that her pelvis was out. Was it? Well, probably. In that moment, her pelvis may well have been sitting a little differently. One hip did move differently. Her ribcage was certainly moving differently. She was carrying more tension through one side. Those observations were real. They weren't imagined. But here's the important question. Why were they like that? That's the question I become interested in. Did her body wake up that morning and simply decide to become crooked? Probably not. Maybe she's been caring for her elderly mother. Maybe she spent the last 3 weeks carrying a toddler that she's not used to carrying. Maybe she stopped walking because of heel pain. Maybe she's been under enormous emotional stress. Maybe she wasn't breathing well because of persistent ribcage stiffness. Maybe she'd changed the way that she moves because of pain. The posture wasn't the diagnosis. It was information. It was one chapter of the story, not the whole story. So let's come back to the question we started with. Do you really need better posture? My answer is probably not in the way that we've been led to believe. I don't think most of us need to spend our lives trying to hold ourselves in perfect posture. Instead, I think we need bodies that feel comfortable moving through lots of different positions. Bodies that can bend, that can reach, that can stretch, that can rotate, that can carry things, that can walk comfortably, that can sit and stand, that can get onto the floor and get back up again. Bodies that can adapt to whatever life asks of them. Because life doesn't happen in one posture. Life happens in movement. Now imagine 2 trees standing side by side. One is completely rigid, hardly moves at all. The other bends and sways with the wind. Now imagine that a storm comes through. Which tree is more likely to survive? Usually, it's the one that can adapt, the one that can move, the one that isn't fighting against every gust of wind, that goes with the flow, so to say. Our bodies are remarkably similar. The goal isn't becoming perfectly aligned. The goal is becoming adaptable, strong, resilient, able to respond to whatever life asks of us. And I think that's a much healthier goal than chasing perfect posture. One of the reasons I love what I do is that every single person teaches me something. I've spent years studying anatomy, pain science, and the incredible complexity of the human body. But some of my biggest insights haven't come from a textbook. They've come from sitting across from thousands of people, listening to their stories, watching how they move, and asking myself one simple question. Why has this person's body chosen this particular strategy? That's very different from asking, what's wrong with them? Because when we only ask what's wrong, we often end up looking for something that's broken. But when we ask why, our perspective changes. We become more curious, and curiosity is one of the most important tools that we have in healthcare. We can see ways that our bodies are adapting, and this is a response to stimulus. Over the years, I've also become increasingly fascinated by how adaptable the human body really is. If you think about this for a moment, have you ever carried a heavy shopping bag on one side or a child on one hip? Have you ever spent hours gardening or moved house, painted a room, driven all day, worked at a computer for 10 hours straight? Well, change the way that we move. Maybe afterwards we notice that one shoulder feels tighter or our back feels stiff. Maybe our neck is sore. Maybe we can't move quite so comfortably. Or our body is just telling there's something different. Does that mean that your body is damaged? Not usually. More often not, it means that your body's been adapting to the demands that you've placed on it. And that's what healthy bodies do. They adapt. I've often noticed in myself, after a busy clinic day, I might realize that I've spent hours leaning over patients more from one side, or perhaps I've been sitting at the computer for longer than usual while working on course material or writing notes. Sometimes I'll stand up and think, wow, I really feel a little stiff today, but I don't need to panic. I don't automatically assume that something's gone wrong. Instead, I see it as information. I listen to my body, because my body is simply letting me know that it's responding to what I've asked it to do today. Maybe it needs some movement, maybe a walk or some stretching. Maybe moving in an opposite direction to what I have been doing. maybe just a good night's sleep. And that sort of conversation feels a little bit kinder to have with myself than, I've done it again, I've put too much stress on myself and now my body is out and now I'll have to pay for it. But I know what you're thinking. Alexis, I really can see that one shoulder is higher, or my pelvis really does feel twisted. And you know what? You may well be right, because bodies aren't perfectly symmetrical. Mine sure is not. Yours probably isn't either. One foot is often actually slightly longer or wider than the other. One hip might move a little differently. One side of the rib cage might expand more easily than the other. One shoulder may naturally sit a little bit higher. And one leg may appear longer in a certain position and shorter in another. These are all observations, and observations can be incredibly useful. As an osteopath, I spend a lot of my time observing. I look at posture. I look at how somebody moves, the way they breathe, the way they walk, if they are balanced when doing any of these things, how they bend or squat or transfer weight, how their rib cage and pelvis move together or not together. Because posture provides lots of information, but movement reveals function. That's where the real story often begins. I've also noticed something else over the years. I've seen people, often one after the other in clinic, that have really similar twists and strains in their body, but one feels pain in the right hip and one feels pain in the left hip, or where one person feels pain in the hip where a different person would feel pain in the knee. If posture alone explained pain, that wouldn't make much sense. Likewise, I've seen people whose scans show age-related changes, yet they're gardening and hiking and travelling and enjoying life. And then I've met people who have very little changes on imaging who are experiencing significant discomfort. But what that tells me is something really important. Pain is rarely explained by one single thing. It's usually a combination of many influences: movement, load, recovery, stress, sleep, previous injuries, our confidence levels, our breathing, our general health, our nervous system. And yes, sometimes posture is part of that picture too, but it's rarely the entire picture. So that's why I'd encourage you to think of posture as a clue, not a conclusion. It's one piece of the information, one chapter in the story, not the whole book. And I think that's incredibly useful and hopeful, because if your body isn't defined by one posture or one scan or one diagnosis, then it also means that your future isn't determined by them either. Your body has the remarkable ability to continue adapting, to continue learning, to continue to be more resilient, and to heal. And that's exactly what we're trying to encourage. Not perfection, progress. Not rigidity, adaptability. Not fear, confidence. So what changed? One of the things I really enjoy about healthcare is that it's always evolving. As clinicians, we're constantly learning. Sometimes new research confirms what we'd believed for years. Sometimes it helps us to refine our thinking. And occasionally, it completely changes the questions that we're even asking. I think that's one of the reasons that I still love learning after all of these years, because the human body keeps reminding us that it is wonderfully complex and adaptable, and we sure don't know all about it yet. If we'd had this conversation 30 or 40 years ago, many health professionals would have confidently said, poor posture causes pain. And it seems quite logical. If something looks crooked, surely there must be a problem, and if one shoulder is higher, if your spine isn't perfectly straight, then surely that means that load's going to change. And that's going to, over time, lead to pain. That seems like an obvious explanation. And to be fair, often it is an important part of the explanation. But over time, research has started to notice something really interesting, something quite surprising. After looking at thousands of people, people with back pain, people without back pain, people with neck pain, people without neck pain, people with good posture, and people with poor posture. And they started asking, does posture consistently predict who will have pain? And the answer wasn't as simple as everyone had expected. They found people with what many would have called beautiful posture still had pain. And they found that people who had slouched postures, or sat awkwardly, or worked physically demanding jobs, or stood in ways that looked less ideal, many of those still had no pain at all. Now that doesn't mean that posture is irrelevant, far from it, but it tells us something much more interesting. Posture is one of the influences, not the only influence on our body and our pain. Imagine you're baking a cake. Could flour influence the final result? Of course. But flour isn't the whole cake. You also need eggs, liquids, fats, heat, and time. So the same is true for our bodies. Posture will contribute, but so might breathing, how you sleep, the stress levels you're currently under, how strong and confident you feel, how often and well you move, how well your body recovers, what previous injuries you have suffered, your general health, the demands of your work, your fitness, even your belief about pain. When all of those ingredients come together, they create the experience that you're having today. And, well, that's incredibly good news, because if posture was the only thing that mattered, recovery would simply be about finding the perfect position. But many of us know from experience that that doesn't really happen. Have you ever caught yourself sitting perfectly upright, only to notice that your neck or your mid-back starts to hurt? Or perhaps you found yourself completely relaxed on holidays, moving more, breathing better, laughing more, sleeping well. And somehow your pain starts to settle down, even though you're probably not thinking about your posture differently, and you're probably not making movements and standing differently either. Why? Because your body doesn't experience life one factor at a time. It experiences everything altogether. One of the biggest shifts in my clinical thinking has been moving away from asking, what position is your body in? Towards asking things like, how well can they move in general between positions? Now, that might sound like a pretty small difference, but it's actually quite big, because life isn't lived in one single posture. Life is movement. Remembering that we bend and reach and twist, we carry, we lift, we walk and sit and stand and roll over in bed. We might play with the grandchildren. We might load or unload the dishwasher and do gardening and travel and dance and sing and live. The body isn't designed to hold one perfect position all day. It's designed to move confidently between thousands of different positions. Sometimes people ask me, so what's the perfect posture? And honestly, I think the better answer is your next posture. Now that might sound a bit confusing, but the healthiest posture is often the one that changes. If you've been sitting, then stand. If you've been standing, then walk. If you've been walking, then maybe sit or rest for a while. Variation is healthy. Our bodies love variability. They're built for it. In fact, when I assess someone in clinic, I'm much more interested in how they move and how different parts work together when they move than whether they look perfectly straight when they're in a still position. Can they rotate comfortably? Can they breathe well? Can they transfer their weight when they walk? Can they balance comfortably and confidently? Can they bend without fear? Can they get up from the floor or walk with ease? Can they adapt when life asks something different of them? Because those questions tell me much more about how their body is functioning. I think this is one of the biggest lessons that my patients have taught me over the years. People who tend to do best aren't actually the ones chasing perfect posture and strength. They're the ones who gradually rebuild their confidence, become less afraid to move, begin trusting their body again, improve their capacity, and over time their body will respond remarkably well. Not because it's suddenly become perfect, not necessarily even much better in its alignment, but because it becomes more adaptable, more able to move. Before we finish today, I'd like to invite you to try these simple things just through this week. No pressure, no failure, no I did it or I didn't, just a bit of curiosity. So the first invitation is simply to become more curious. This week, notice how often you catch yourself thinking, oh, my body is not in alignment, or my body's out, or my posture feels terrible, or I've done something wrong. Don't judge yourself, just notice. Then ask yourself a different question. I wonder what my body is trying to tell me. Notice how that feels in your body as well, as compared to, oh, what's wrong with me now? The second invitation, instead of chasing perfect posture, see if you can give your body a little more variety. If you've been sitting, stand or walk. And if you've been standing, walk or stretch a little bit. If you've been gardening, stretch in a different direction to how you have been in the last half an hour or so. If you've been working at the computer, take a few deep breaths, move your rib cage, roll your shoulders, move your hips, walk to make a cup of tea or get a glass of water. Healthy bodies don't usually need one perfect position. They thrive on variety, not staying in one position too long. And the final invitation is I'd like to invite you to trust your body a little more. Your body has spent your entire life adapting, learning, protecting you, helping you. It's far more capable than you realize it is. So over the next weeks, take what your body is trying to tell you as feedback, not that your body is doing something wrong. Over the next few weeks, we're going to keep gently challenging some of the assumptions that many of us have grown up believing. Not because they're completely wrong, but because sometimes seeing through a slightly different lens changes the way we think about things and we care for ourselves. And I'm hoping that little by little, these conversations can help you to become more confident in your body, more confident in your movement, and perhaps just a little bit more curious about your body and yourself. Because I truly believe recovery begins with understanding.
So that's it for today. Did it raise any questions or aha moments? If so, I'd love to hear them, so please put those in the comments section. I love answering questions. I hope you found today useful. And if you know someone who could use this information, please share it. Remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Until next time, and in health, bye for now.